Christianity rests on the historical proclamation that Jesus rose from the dead.
The evidence of history shows us that the early church absolutely believed that the resurrection was historical, an event that changed the world.
When it comes to the resurrection, we of course have the most important phenomenon in the history of the world.
The resurrection of Jesus from the dead is the cornerstone of the Christian faith. But some liberal scholars say it is a spiritual reality, but not necessarily true history.
I would say that it is virtually impossible to maintain the idea that we can separate religious truths from historical facts, and it has to do with the nature of Christianity. Christianity is fundamentally dependent on historical truths. In other words, if Jesus is not resurrected from the dead, then we don't have Christianity. If you want to have a set of religious truths, there's plenty of ways to do that, and there are good teachings in the New Testament. So if you separate out and say that the historical basis is not important, I would argue you don't have Christianity.
The resurrection from the dead is an impossibility on any humanistic terms. It could not happen. But what kind of universe do we live in? So it's a presuppositional question. If you believe that this is a universe where God created everything out of nothing by the bare word of His power, then the resurrection is a very minor miracle in comparison.
If the resurrection didn't happen, we can actually falsify it and walk away and stop talking about this stuff. So I was encouraged as an investigator that that was the nature of the claim.
Let's consider some key facts about the resurrection. First, the tomb was empty. Even the enemies of Christianity have acknowledged that.
The tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, into which Jesus was buried on Friday, was in fact empty on the morning of the resurrection.
You have an empty tomb. If it wasn't empty, this would be over in the first century.
Now, I'll be the first to say that an empty tomb does not prove a resurrection, but reverse it. You can't have a resurrection, at least a decent one, without the tomb being empty as its first symptom. And the empty tomb can be proven.
Even the opponents of Jesus conceded that the tomb was empty. And we have sources outside and inside the Bible that tell us that when the disciples began proclaiming that Jesus had risen, what the opponents said was, the disciples stole the body. Now what is that? That's a cover story. They're conceding the tomb is empty. They're trying to explain how it got empty. Right. So nobody was saying that the tomb was filled with the body of Jesus. Everybody was saying it was gone.
The next point is that every Sunday morning is a weekly reminder around the world of the resurrection of Christ from the dead 2,000 years ago.
The change of the day of worship by the early church from Saturday to Sunday. I mean, what's more important than the Jewish Sabbath? And yet they're going to change the name.
These are Jewish people that were thoroughgoing followers of their way of worship. And the most important principle they followed was the Sabbath law. How did the Jewish Christians suddenly say, we don't worship on the Sabbath anymore? We worship on the first day of the week. The only thing that could have changed their commitment was the resurrection of Christ. They said, we are doing this because Jesus is alive.
Another argument for the resurrection is that He was proclaimed as risen from the dead within days after His crucifixion.
One very powerful evidence is that we have a report of the resurrection of Jesus that has been dated back by scholars to within months of His death. So what we have, it's in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, a creed, a report of the early church that says Jesus died, why? For our sins. He was buried. On the third day He rose from the dead, and then it mentions specific individuals and groups to whom He appeared. And if that creed developed so early, the beliefs that make up that creed go back even earlier. Probably one of the greatest classical historians who ever lived, A.N. Sherwin-White of Oxford, studied the rate at which legend grew up in the ancient world. And he determined that the passage of 2 generations of time is not even enough for legend to grow up and wipe out a solid core of historical truth. We don't have 2 generations passing. We got a news flash from ancient history. So that is a very powerful bit of evidence.
Perhaps the greatest argument for the resurrection is the transformation of those who had seen the risen Christ, beginning with His own disciples, who were skeptical at first. Such was the case when the women came from the tomb of Jesus to tell the apostles He was risen.
And their words seemed to them as idle tales, and they believed them not.
That is until Jesus appeared to them.
We have 9 ancient sources inside and outside the New Testament confirming and corroborating the conviction of the disciples that they encountered the resurrected Jesus. It changed their lives. It changed everything about them. They were willing to die for. We have 7 ancient sources inside and outside the New Testament that say that the disciples were willing to suffer lives of deprivation and suffering as a result of their proclamation.
You have people who refuse to recant their stories. If they had recanted their stories, this would be over with in the first century.
The early biblical testimony shows us that one person after another said, "We saw the living Christ." And perhaps the crescendo is when there's the claim that 500 people saw him at once. An amazing accomplishment of eyewitness accounts from all the gospel testimonies. So they were compelled to believe.
Finally, consider the case of one of the 12 who was not there the first time Jesus appeared to them, Thomas.
So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks on his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it."
A week later, Jesus appeared to them, and Thomas was there.
Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen me, and yet have believed."